What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Twin Suns podcast. Today I wanted to make a little bit of a different video, and I wanted to kind of just talk a little bit today about 5 cards that I believe could be getting buffs at some point in the future, and these 5 cards in particular will be from the Call of the Mountain release cycle. That means they could be from the base set of Call of the Mountain, the Monuments of Power mini expansion, or the most recent Cosmic Creation mini expansion. Now, these are just 5 cards that I find slightly underwhelming, or if they did get buffed, they could open up new archetypes. Obviously, we are currently, and I'm recording this on January 3rd, but we're currently in a meta that is very, let's say, Go Hard and Lee Sin-esque, and Grand Plaza's running about as well. So that is a limiting meta that does limit a lot of mid-range decks, because all 3 of those are very, very good into mid-range decks. That being said, I think some of the archetypes that they have created in Call of the Mountain could be opened up a lot if you just kind of flex 1 or 2 cards, and ideally don't overbuff things, and there's a whole lot that goes into this buffing system here. But I want to talk about 5 different cards that I think could all use buffs and possibly give you an example of what this buff could be. I'm not going to give an exact example, but I'll kind of just try to point out what 5 cards I think all could use a buff, and give an example possibly that isn't absolutely obnoxious, because you will see opinions that are just pretty insane. Obviously, some cards could just be completely broken if they add a plus or minus 1, and that has happened before. So we don't want to go too crazy, but I want to talk about the reasoning behind all 5 cards and what archetypes they would open up if they did receive a buff. So let's dive right in here to this video, and let's start with the Stargazer. So, yes, Targon is pretty dang powerful, and they most likely don't need any buffs. They are a very strong regent, but I do believe this is a card that has a lot of fun potential. It is when you heal a damaged ally, give it elusive this round. This is another way to turn healing into a win condition. We've seen that obviously with the Springs landmark from Targon, but we haven't seen really this card being able to even make those decks. Now, you may wonder why that is. And it's mainly because it's just not nearly as consistent. So this deck would have to be fit into a deck that already has some elusive ability, and then healing is a side portion. And when you do heal, you will get some additional damage going through. If you're trying to focus on really winning with Springs, you might not be healing enough for this card to see play, because this card won't actually help you heal at all. Yes, it does have 4 health on a 4 cost, which isn't anything spectacular, but it won't really help you do any healing toward the Spring condition. So it's really a separate deck. This card comes in a little weak, though. It has a decent ability, a very interesting ability. Granting elusive, or giving elusive, rather, is a very strong ability, but it does come in pretty weak on stats. I think adding a buff to this card could create a archetype. And I don't mean, when I say create an archetype, I don't mean it's going to be another tier 1 deck out there, but could create something that does show a little bit more power and just a little more flexibility to the healing archetype. There's a lot of cool healing cards, and Zoe may have opened up some of that. Some of the smaller Invoke package is always a great example of how you can open up that package and make it actually a lot more interesting, bringing other cards back into the meta. But this, getting a slight buff, could actually introduce maybe another style of a deck where you can use some healing to then give elusive and then push damage through with that. Now, I think it's very interesting and pretty cool, but there are very dangerous things to this. You don't want to give it, granting permanent elusive instead of just giving elusive could be a very dangerous buff. I think maybe reducing the cost down to a 3 and then maybe dropping it to a 3/3 or something would be totally justified. I don't think the ability is strong enough to warrant this hard of a stat deduction, because it's a pretty low stats for a 4-drop. This is more of a 3-drop stats. And I don't think the ability is that strong to do that or to warrant how much it's actually getting hurt by that. But yes, it is a dangerous ability. I understand elusive is a very dangerous mechanic. It can win a lot of games. But there's a lot of specificity to this. You have to heal a unit of one of your allies that is already damaged. There's a lot of board building that needs to be done for this to even be effective. And since that is the case, I don't think it deserves to have as low a stats either. An increase in stats or bringing it down a cost could be a decent option for this card. That being said, before I move on, I do want to say not every card is meant to be a tier 1 card, but they do like to, in the devs of this game, we've talked to a lot of them, they want to make every card have some viability, some home. Whether that home is just an expedition, that's fine. But the cards want to have a use, and right now I think this could open up another way to turn all of the cards that we have based on healing that really only fit into one deck I think that that could open up the deck and move it into something a little bit cooler and a little bit more interesting. This card's very interesting, a very cool card. I just wish it had a little bit more going for it. So the second card I wanted to talk about here was Homecoming. Homecoming is a new card. It's a spell. It's a 5 cost. Recall an ally unit or landmark to recall an enemy unit or landmark. Obviously, right now, Ionia is not in the best position. Ionia has been in a pretty bad position for a little bit. They do have Nope, Find, Deny, which gets splashed into packages with Lee Sin, combo decks, and some other decks there. But Ionia in general used to be a lot more elaborate and a lot more just all over the place. They had a lot more going for them. I think that one of the big nerfs was Will of Ionia getting moved from 4 to 5, which I don't, completely disagree with that nerf. But Homecoming here, as landmark hate, it just comes in a little bit high costed. Not only do you have to pay 5 to recall an ally and recall one of your own allies, but all that does then is just recall an opponent and an opponent's enemy unit or a landmark. Now that's just very expensive. You have to put 5 in, and yes, now there is the case that yes, recalling an own ally could be a beneficial thing. This does count for 2 procs toward Yasuo's level up condition. Recalling certain allies will let you play them again. Or you can buff your other units like the Legion General or the Fey Blade Twirler, but it's not always the case, and this also makes this a dead card if you don't have a board. If you have units on your board that are getting blasted off every turn or getting killed by challenger units via Grand Plaza, you won't even be able to use Homecoming because you won't have a board, or the only option you will have is to recall a very powerful unit of yours, which will slow you down tremendously. You can't really afford to use this plus recalling a more expensive unit. You're going to lose all the tempo in the world. I think this card is drastically overcosted, and I would like to see it get reduced at least to a 4. And yes, that does open up the possibility where, it's kind of like Will of Ionia, right? Well, right now it's even more like it because it costs 5 at the moment, which is the same cost of Will of Ionia. But the recall an ally unit, I understand it could be a bonus. I think in most cases it's not going to work out that way. This card is very counterable if you play it aggressively, and they still have mana. They can kill your unit, and therefore the whole card would fizzle. The one good thing this card does have going for it is the way it can counter other things. If they're going to kill one of your units, you can save your unit as well as bounce one of their units. That is very powerful, but there's a lot of playability around that where both sides can really play around that situation in general. I think this card at 4 mana would be totally acceptable. Call me crazy. The last card is actually, or the third card here, is Lulu. Lulu is an extremely dangerous card to touch. I completely understand, and it is a very, very scary card to buff. And I don't know what the buff looks like. It's 100% not just a stat buff. So she grows support. She supports and grows her supported ally to a 4/4, which is a lot of potential. She levels up very quickly because she levels up when allies have only been supported 3 times. So she levels up great. And then when she is in level 2 form, she creates a help picks every turn, which is extremely valuable. She is a very hard card to balance, and I don't know exactly what that balancing will intake. I don't think it's a +1 attack. Definitely don't think it's a +1 health. I don't know if it's a cost change to a 4 and then giving her extra stats. That might even be a nerf. I don't know what the buff is. I'm being completely honest. I don't know where I would go with this, and I'd have to put a lot more time in testing for, other than just a video like this where I'm kind of just crap shooting what I think buffs could happen. But there's something about this Lulu package that has drastically missed, as well as Taric, and they have buffed Taric, and Lulu's had her decks that were okay, but a lot of this just gets very, very countered. It really matters when you have the attack token. Hard removal really hurts it, and Notify is a great card, and it can stop a lot of that removal, which does help. But then they add things like Grand Plaza, which is really just kind of murdering these support decks as well, because you never even get to attack with your units. Although, Lulu might be able to get some damage in underneath of Grand Plaza, granted. But there's still just a very hard condition to meet when you really want to win with a Lulu deck. Now, if you're a huge Lulu fan, I am too. I literally have played multiple Lulu decks and tried to make her work as much as I could. She's very, very fun. But there is definitely something lacking in the terms of consistency, and I don't know what the buff would be, but I think this might be the most underperforming champion of the new set when you look through all of them. Victor and Riven are very, very new, and they're slightly underperforming right now, but I still think they have pretty good value. The old ones, Shyvana got buffed, Taric got buffed, Lulu is the one that didn't. And I think she does need a little bit of attention. And I will say one last time, granted, it is an extremely fine line there because you can 100% buff this to a point where she is way too powerful. So I won't even act like I know what the buff is without having the ability to put in plenty of playtesting behind the scenes. Boom Ship is the fourth card here. It's a brand new card. Yeah, it just needs a little bit of love. It's a 3-cost slow spell, and again, not all cards are supposed to be super competitive, but this one just seems pretty bad. 3-cost slow spell, deal 1 to a unit, and you summon powder kegs equal to the amount of damage dealt. So the idea there is if you have a keg or 2 out, you're dealing 2 or 3 damage, and then you're summoning 2 additional kegs there. Slow speed absolutely murders this card. I understand parlay is slow speed, and they have other slow spells in this region, but Boom Ship really, really hurts being slow speed, and the idea of summoning extra kegs is more of just a meme at this point because you really don't need that many more kegs. Now, if this card is just meant to be a keg happy, you want to play Gangplank and make 1,000 kegs, it's doing its job. It's just not going to see any play. And realistically, I just think it's one of the worst spells that we've seen in a while, for sure. I know if this is offending any of you guys, I'm just calling it as it is. As far as playability these cards have. If you've built decks with this and it's worked out, that's awesome. I'm very, very proud of you because this is a hard card to make work. But I do think this could use some type of buff. Moving it to fast speed does make it actually pretty good. I think it actually could be. I understand why it's not thematically. It's a ship, right? It shouldn't be fast speed. It's literally a ship filled with barrels with explosives. So yeah, fast speed doesn't look that fast to me. But just for playability wise, they put Make It Rain to 3 mana. This thing at 3 mana, it's slow. I'd rather just play Make It Rain, and if I had a keg out anyway. You're not getting any value out of this unless you really have a keg. One keg, not having a keg out and just getting 1 keg from this is pretty subpar. You can also just completely avoid the spell with, a Glimpse Beyond or anything like that. So it definitely needs something. I don't know if fast speed's the answer. I wouldn't even hate if this thing was 2 mana, just to be perfectly honest. And that might be a little bit high on the power scale, but right now it's really low on the power scale. All right, the last card here is Arel the Tracker. This card's very interesting. It's a super fun card. I've played with it in multiple decks. It's very fun, and it actually has a lot of value. The problem is here, really, it only is good against other units, other decks that want to produce a board. So if you're playing against a control deck, this card's relatively dead. You're only going to be able to kill their units, their weakest units, but a lot of times they're going to have crappy weak units they don't really care about, or they're not going to have any units at all because they're just kind of waiting to play Feel the Rush or something like that. And at 6 mana, it's very late into aggro and things like that, which is fine. Not every card has to be good against every archetype, but this thing is very specifically good into one thing, and on top of that, it requires build up to needing spells to be played on it. Without that, the card kind of just falls a little flat, and I've tried a lot of times, and it works really well with gems because you get up to 3 attack very quick, and then you can strike enemy units. But the amount of times I even need to be able to do that isn't that high. The other thing is playing a 2/5 on turn 6. If in the meta we're in, and in a lot of metas that we've been in, you can't really afford to do that. A lot of times, people are pushing out pressure on their turn 6. They're playing big units, right? Playing a 2/5 and then going in for more building of your board, building of spells. It's risky. I've played the decks. I've played it with Tarek. I've played it with Riven. I've played it with Demacia for Ionia, for those type of spells. I've tried this card multiple times, and I haven't found it to be very powerful. I don't know the exact buff, but I'd probably start with maybe making it a 2/4 at 5 cost. I think 6 is really late for this thing to come down. I know there is another 5 cost Noxus card that just came out, the 7/3 with Challenger, but that being said, I just don't see this thing being viable much longer, and it is a really cool card. That being said, I do think it needs some slight attention. It is another fine line, not as a fine line as Lulu is, because Lulu is an extremely thin line. But you could put this card to where it actually becomes a little bit oppressive with how powerful it is. But that being said, I do think this is the last card I want to talk about, and that is the 5 cards from Call of the Mountain that I would buff. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment. Please like the video, subscribe to us. Don't miss out any more content we have going on here, and it'll be plenty in this new year of 2021. Till next time.